Welcome to the fifth Tuesday, a special edition of Planet Poet Words in Space on WIOX Community Radio. I'm your host, Sharon Israel, and my guest co-host today is the internationally acclaimed poet and novelist Lee Slonimsky, who has graced Planet Poet with at least 10 appearances. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Sharon. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. Over the year, when Planet Poet falls on the fifth Tuesday of the month, Lee invites writers from the Hudson Valley, New York City, and beyond to my Fifth Tuesday show. Today, Lee has brought the wonderful poet Pui Ying Wong to read from and discuss her newest collection, Fanling in October. Hi, Pui.
Hi, Sharon. Hi, Lee.
Hi, Pui.
And I'm going to read Lee's bio now for everybody. Lee Slonimsky's latest books are Pythagoras and the Animals in Greece, translated by Stamatis, Polenakis, and Caterina, Marikoupou; Pythagoras in Love in Italy, translated by Enrico Bernard; and Bright Yellow Buzz in the United States. On November 2nd, Lee will lecture at the Keats Shelley House Museum in Rome on the historical connections among Pythagoras, Petrarch, Shakespeare, and John Keats. His wife, Carol Goodman, two-time winner of the Mary Higgins Clark Award, is just out with her latest literary thriller, The Bones of the Story. And now, Lee, I'm going to let you take it away.
Thank you, Sharon. So it's a great pleasure to have Pui here. She's really just a remarkable, just brilliant and totally original poet. And we'll get to hear quite a bit of her work today. And hopefully people will, in the audience, will look to delve further into it, which is well worth doing. Pui Ying Wong's poetry book, Fanling in October, is forthcoming from Barrow Street Press. She's also the author of three other collections, The Feast, An Emigrant's Winter, and Yellow Plum Season, along with two chapbooks, Sonnet For a New Country and Mementos. And I'm just going to interject that I have read all of these books, and really it's totally worth doing. It just opened the door to a completely original poet. She has received the Pushcart Prize. Her poems have appeared in Ploughshares, Prairie Schooner, Plume, Chicago Quarterly Review, New Letters, Zone 3, among many others. Born in Hong Kong, she now lives in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with her husband, the poet Tim Suermondt. Again, I'd like to welcome you, Pui, to Fifth Tuesday. And again, I'm going to repeat that Fanling, just an extraordinary book, and there's no way we could really go over all of it in the time we have. But I want to give the audience pretty much a comprehensive view of the variety of subject matter and really the style of writing. Pui, if you could read August.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much, Lee. August. In an outer barrow's vacant lot, a bush of moonflowers fur in the daylight. They are sensitive to the sun, flaring high on the towers, bits of a season boiling over. Wait for the moon to rise and dark rims of turf emerge. Wait for the noise to die and the bedtime milk thicken. For muscles around the constricted layer necks to relax. Like the fragile voices of poets, they will open in fullness in August's cool shadows.
It's so beautiful. Thank you, Pui.
Yes, it's typical, or I wouldn't say, shouldn't even use the word typical, but it's evocative of your really amazing ability to give a sense of place and of emotion in just a few words. You know, I think there are several moments here, the moonflowers being sensitive to the sun, and then beats of the season boiling over. And then just a wonderful observation at the end that the flowers could open like the fragile voices of poets, which, I think is a very, that's a great kind of tribute to people who work hard at writing poetry. Was there any particular inspiration? You wrote it at the end of August, or if there's anything you could tell the reader about where this poem came from.
Oh, yes, Lee, thank you for that question. This poem is actually written for my friend, a poet Connie Nogren. And I remember that was a few summer ago when my husband Tim and I visited her and in Brooklyn. And she took us to see moonflowers in the neighborhood. Moonflowers is not anything that I was familiar with, but from her introduction, I recognize that it is really a delicate flowers, and so that kind of inspired this poem, taking the cue from the flowers, and then something the poem open up. I remember it being very hot, as you can see in August. And so that just kind of make me think about all the fragile matters that are in the seasons. And so those are the background behind the poem.
Mm-hmm. So that's really very, very interesting and kind of very informative. I mean, could you speak a little bit more generally about how you find inspiration and whether that's changed as you've gone on as a writer? I'm sure everyone would like to hear about that.
I think that for me, it's actually not too different from your method, Lee, or what inspire you. For me, it's always a certain impression that happened in a day. It is something maybe I thought about, something I saw, or something I felt. So I don't think my poems are heavily driven by a topic or theme, but more of an impression.
I was very impressed the way you started out in this vacant lot. The images unfold, and then you get to the metaphor of the fragile voices of poets. It's so organic and it's so natural. The journey through the poem is quite exquisite.
Oh, Sharon, thank you. Thank you for that. For me, I really do not think that I have a method, but I like to think about an image or something that inspired a poem, and I just like to follow that. It is to see where it takes me.
And in terms of the settings of your poems, which also are extremely diverse and really, I think, both original and imaginative. Of course, you grew up in China, and or I won't say often, but you do on occasion sort of go back in memory or draw on details from an earlier life, which I find also very fascinating, the way you're able to do it in just a few words, just the depth of the content that goes in those few words. And I think as we hear Fanling in October, everyone listening to the lines, there are just so many different levels of meaning for each one. So without further ado, Pui, if you could read Fanling in October.
Fanling in October. My father in a hospital bed in a city in which he's lived like an exile, among bohemia, thick air, hubbub, and speed. He's weak, and to the therapists who come to help, he refuses. He doesn't want to sit up. He doesn't want to hold a spoon. He doesn't want to open his eyes. When he does see us, his children, he roll calls us as if we are back from the missing. The woman who is not our mother feeds him kanji. Everyone urges him to eat. Eat, this tastes good. Eat, you need strength. Eat, so you can live, to ourselves. The chorus sings heavily in the room. Whatever we each think of and what memories we keep from one another, submerged like an underwater city. He is no longer the young man who wrote "The sun burns, flame of youth" on a black and white photograph he inscribed for my mother. The photograph survives, but not their love. Nor is he the father I, as a girl, spotted from the bedroom window, coming home among commuters, head held high, back straight, like a man who thinks about pride. If he has gone back, he would see, as I have, that the bus terminal is gone. The ferry is still there, but not the fish vendors with the buckets of pipes and yellow crookers. And where our home once was, a new hotel, glimmering like any other glass tower. I think now about what's rent between us, how a family dies not by knife or fire, but by drought. Its heart shrinking so you wouldn't notice at first. Gradually, the only conversations, laughter, and tears are those that pour out from the television everyone stares at, eating dinner. And when we finally disperse, we disperse like nomads. Like a nomad, I leave behind things, the window, the bed, jugs of sugar, the cup I love drinking from.
Oh, gorgeous.
If I just make a note, to the reader who may not be so familiar with Fanling, it is a suburb that is in Hong Kong. Originally, it was really just a fishing village with a handful people living there, mostly farmer. But in the 80s on, the Hong Kong government had built a lot of housing blocks. And so it brought a lot of people, residents in the area.
Wonderful.
I find this poem just so gripping in the family details and the picture that we get, not only the father in the poem, but also of, the family situation. And I just like to read there's 5 lines which come on the second page by themselves that I think are both amazing in their artistry, yet their simplicity. Their simplicity actually is their artistry, but the details are just so wonderfully chosen. And that I'll just read these lines. You can, I think, hear this as if it's a poem within a poem. He is no longer the young man who wrote "The sunburned flame of youth" on a black and white photograph he inscribed for my mother. The photograph survives, but not their love. I just found that very powerful. And especially what I thought was a great detail was the sun, the flame, and yet the black and white photograph. So we see there that we see in the father, first of all, a hint of some poetic heritage in the family. And then the contrast between sort of the goldenness of the second line and then the ordinariness of the photograph being in black and white. There may well have been such a photograph and such an inscription, but just, framing it this way, and I felt was, really very moving and just, I know I've used this reference before, but in poetry, language and writing this good sort of reminds me of what's been said about Jane Austen, and the idea that simplicity is her style, and it's easy to go through it as a reader, but it's really impossible to duplicate it. Pui's language is often quite complex. I don't mean that her, vocabulary is simple or anything like that, but it just flows. It's very readable. And the other thing I want to point out in this poem, and which is another particular great skill and talent that Pui has, is ending poems, which is one of the hardest things to do as a writer. And here we have this ending, the cup I love drinking from.
It's so unexpected and beautiful. This is so sad, and yet the writing is very direct. It's very sort of, there's almost a sense of reportage about it, like Reznikov in a way, but very different. I find that Fanling, and that's a beautiful name, Fanling in October, you don't know what this poem's going to be about. It could be anything. And it's about place. And you start with your father in a hospital bed in the city. And by the end of the poem, you are nomads that have lost everything in a way. I was very struck by that. Thank you, Pui.
Very well said. I totally agree. And yet, surprise, that's the real challenge, I think, or can be the real challenge of ending a poem. You don't want it to be a summary. At the same time, it is the end. But if you can make it the end in a way that fits the logic of the poem, but also takes you onward to someplace mysterious, because it's the last line. But you'll see this in just about every poem in the book, that the ending is really satisfactory because it has those two elements of both, conclusion and surprise, and also that the reader would never have seen it coming. Moving on, and I want to say something just briefly. It's a simple title. To me, though, this is just a really great title. I mean, it's at first, I think, when I first read the manuscript, I thought maybe this was a misprint or there was a word missing, but there isn't. It's just so, it's very, I think it's a kind of a transcendental observation, and just a very, very deep one. So without further ado, I would like to ask Pui to read Be Water.
Oh. Be Water, Hong Kong, 2019. Bohemians are bedraggled, bruised. The red of an empire spreads like jam over every street. The eye of the city looks back at its own watermark, twice colonized. In the language of domination, what's changed is the way people are regarded, from subjects to children. The bullet misses the boy's heart by a fingernail. People walk out into the heat in morning black, trying to learn the way of water. The eye of the city, thickened by tear gas, will not blink.
So almost, I feel like almost every line in this poem, on the one hand, they're also fluid and they're very vivid and they really make an impact. On the other hand, the fineness of these lines is like they're really been engraved in marble. Well, I look at just the second stanza, the red of an empire spreads like jam over every street. That is just such an original metaphor. And even though it's a very grim line, the bullet misses the boy's heart by a fingernail. That is just, as they say, precise. You think about the precision of the measurement, and yet really inspired. So I'm curious if you could tell us anything about how this poem was written.
Oh, yes. So the term "be water" was adopted by the Hong Kong protester during the 2019 pro-democracy movement. It was a martial art term originally used by the actor and Hong Kong icon Bruce Lee to suggest fluidity in dealing with the opposition. So the tactic of be water include constantly moving around to various neighborhoods in order to evade and dilute the police force. So that was a poem written during that time when Hong Kong was going through this huge challenge and movement. And in the poem, Bohemia is the emblem of a city flower. So I think it speaks to a place, a city that is under siege.
So the Bohemias are flowers, Pui?
Yes, it's an emblem. It represents the city of Hong Kong.
Mm.
Yeah, I was not familiar with that, the history of Be Water, and one thought that came to mind when you mentioned it is that it, in a sense, it originates as kind of a sports or athletic metaphor. It's very vivid. Well, thanks for that, explanation of the background, and
Yes.
it's just very. I think it's just a very, very brilliant poem. Okay, so let's move on then to a poem I strongly identified with, just maybe from being kind of in the writing culture sensation that the poem is filled with, and I think very, very evocatively, and that's Sunset over Amherst.
Sunset over Amherst. An empty gazebo. After dinner, the sky turns, kinks of the day smooth. Few paths converge here, one to the lake, the other to the road, one more to our studio. Uneven patches of grass, unknown berries, ivies wild around the bend. The moon has a chip, pen scratches on paper.
Mm.
So, as I was mentioning before, the rise of imagism, which has a long and complex history, could never have envisioned a more powerful two lines than the last two lines of this poem. It's just so penetrating. It's terse. It certainly has no extra words. And it seems to really, really, in a way, conclude the similar, or not specifically similar, but the other images like this that preceded in the poem. Amherst, of course, famously associated with Emily Dickinson. I don't know if that was a particular influence on this poem, but it did want, and I'd ask you to just say a few words about this. When an author's style is and sensibility is so singular, I mean, it's a very widely pursued sort of avocation with reading poetry to look for influences. And I would say myself, reading really Pui's poetry for quite a few years, both in her published career and also in a poetry workshop long ago, I realized in the last few years that she definitely has influenced me. I mean, there are certain poems I've written, they typically have a little bit of a dream-like narrative. I remember a poem I wrote years ago about suddenly being in Spain, and I don't know if I've ever even shown it to anyone. But she has this, I would describe it as she explores without being a surrealist, without being Kafkaesque, without being imitating Borges, the latter two, of course, not being poets, but it's just the borderline sometimes between wake and asleep, between dream and reality, that sort of thing. She often gets to that borderline in her work, and it's very powerful. And that's a long-winded way of asking if she could tell us a little bit about who may have influenced her in her own work, if anyone, but I don't assume, but obviously poetry this sophisticated and this effective is probably from a well-read poet. But if I could just, ask Pui to talk about that a little bit.
So Lee, it's really true that I am influenced by many poets. Almost every poet that I read in some way had influenced me. You can't help it. But there are certainly poets that are my favorite, that I go back to again and again. And for example, the Polish poet Adam Zagajewski is one of my favorite poets. So is Ivan Bolan, the Irish poet, wonderful Irish, who actually both of these poets taught in America colleges for many years. And there are many others, like the Hong Kong poet Lang Ping Kwan and CC. And they are actually non-poet writer that I just love reading too. So they're just numerous, and including yourself, Lee.
Thank you.
One of my favorite poets, and so they're just, because I think that as poet we write what we read. We absorbed it, consciously or unconsciously.
I just wanted to say that I met you, Pui, in Lee's class workshop, Walking with the Sonnet. And I remember Lee had given an exercise about describing, I think, an animal or something. And I was totally at sea. I was a very new poet. And you wrote this poem about an ant. And it was so great. It was like, my goodness, an ant could be so fascinating, the way you got the imagery, you got the essence of the ant. And I'll never forget that. That was a long time ago. So thank you. I just love about this poem, Sunset Over Amherst, that there's nobody in the poem. It's an empty gazebo. But yet you say one of the paths converge to our studio. So immediately you're with someone, the speaker is not alone. And then at the end, the poet is scratching on the paper. So there is the poet. But it's very complex, the way there's no one in the poet, and yet there is a big, big presence in the poem. So thank you for that, if I'm getting that right.
Sharon, actually, thank you for that. In fact, this poem was written, it's true, in Amherst. However, it's Amherst, Virginia, which is the Virginia Center for the Art has a residency. They welcome poet, writers, and other artists there. So I spent perhaps 2 weeks there, 1 year, that inspired the poem.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very interesting observation that Sharon made, because another strength really of Pui's work, which is kind of very difficult to pin down. I can't think of examples, and probably in American poetry, if forced to name one poet who possesses this gift, it's William Carlos Williams, although I might think of someone else if I carried the thought further. But this is a tremendous talent for omitting. Not always
Mhm.
words are on the page, but what words are not on the page, and things we might assume, which often happens, for example, with beginning fiction writers who feel that, you know, they kind of have to give you every detail of what's going on, and that can happen with poets too. But what I have found with Pui's work over the years is that the mystery and the meaning, they can come from what's not there as well as what is. And in this particular poem, if we had more details spelled out about who are these people, who is the narrator, where are, I think maybe it would have made it a lesser poem. You know, it's kind of course, Williams' Between Walls, which is, I've had decades to memorize that poem, which I often refer to. It's like 12 words long, and I've never done it, but I will paraphrase: between the walls of the hospital, amidst the black cinders, is the bright shards of the green bottle. I mean, I don't have it. That's very garbled, but many things you don't hear in that poem. Where is this? What town? What hospital? Are the broken green fragments like a very much dark urban kind of, you know, garden, all that? It's just those lines. And he wrote it along with the Red Wheelbarrow. These are examples of brevity that are along the imagistic viewpoint, you know, that essentially 19th century and earlier periods in poetry were overriding. To me, that as a criticism, as a broad criticism, I reject it. I mean, the entire 600 or 700 years of English language poetry since Chaucer, where you could kind of date it from. I mean, it's endless centuries of groups of poets mocking and ridiculing, criticizing other groups of poets, going all the way back to Shakespeare's famous rival poet in the sonnets like 85, 86. And what I'm saying here with Pui's exceptional work is that she draws on this tradition, but it's totally original. Like there's nothing, and she's not, I don't think, ever making an attempt to kind of write sort of poems she can. It's more that her art naturally goes to a kind of conveying of images and thoughts that is truly poetic, that does not bring kind of a set of facts to the reader, but it brings beauty. And I think for myself, this is, you know, one of the ways in which I've been affected the most. Okay, now I want to emphasize, of course, there are many poems in the book, and we're going to fall short of covering anywhere near many of them. But I do hope that as we go through the work that Pui is reading, you will get a sense of just how intense this work is. And I will once again, I think, read the names of the books at the end of the show. But you don't have to look far on the internet to find, if not new, then used copies of her growing. I'll mispronounce. Can I mispronounce a word on the air? Because I have no idea how to pronounce Uber, but there it is, the French.
That's good.
Yeah, okay. I don't even know what it means, but I know it does refer to a body of work. So, okay. So returning to the theme of months in the title, if I can make that up in retrospect, I'll ask Pui if she can read Great Lawn, July.
Great Lawn, July. We are on a bench, idling like the poets we love. A softball team goes home. A young father pushes a pram. Two joggers compare numbers on their wristwatches. The air light like the instant we left a cramped cinema after seeing a heavy drama. Sit long enough and something arrives, a line that is egoless, whose offer we forgot. Dints of the day fade, the world restores to peace. Something comes back like first love, like hearing again the concert once played in the fullness of summer, altos and altos, half nodding, half listening. We sit like dinghies in a no-wake zone, finding what we lost, losing what we found, and neither one wants to leave till towers of lights arrive, bright and owlish.
Hmm.
What a great last word. I mean, bright and owlish, which is the last. I have to say owlish there, which is being used to describe or connect the towers of lights. And of course, what came to my mind is, the bright, the luminescence of owl eyes. But it's such it's really just such I find it just such a surprise, so evocative, and just such a brilliant way to end the poem. But the way in which the details are kind of random, and yet they come together and they give you a real picture and a mood. This is tremendous artistry. It's easy to overlook or to not perceive. But I'll go back to the softball team, the young father, the joggers, and then from a totally different non-human world, the air light, and then the narrator, they're leaving a cinema.
That's my favorite. That's my favorite image. The air light, like the instant we left a cramped cinema after seeing a heavy drama. It opens up the poem, that air, that relief, and you bring that towards the end with the towers of light arrive, bright and owlish. It's connected, but that's a strikingly original, as Lee would say, and body sensitive image. It's not abstract at all, and I love that about it.
Yeah, I'm curious, and again, you've already mentioned, of course, a very a brief but outstanding list of poets. I'm curious, though, if this quality of the just, I would say, the adroitness and adroitness with and command of detail, which is done in a way that is not repetitive, that maintains interest from line to line, and again, not to overuse the word, but it's impossible not to with poetry like this. That is just so compellingly original. Do you feel that this was kind of a gift you've developed on your own, or was there any poet or other type of writer that you read?
To answer that question, I wish I can tell you that I have a method, or because all this is really very mysterious to myself too. And I think my writing are often intuitive. Something just hit me or left an impression with me, and then I keep thinking about it and thinking about it. Sometimes it goes somewhere, and sometimes it doesn't. When the poem really take forms, then I know that I have something to go with.
Very nice.
Okay, well, that's very illuminating.
We have about a minute left. So would you like to end with a poem?
Oh, okay. So why don't I read, since we are on the summer theme, here's a poem called Summer Ended Long Ago. I was the woman going home after a hot day. I took the long way across the soccer field. No one was playing. The clouds tasseled. If there were still good things in this world, I wanted to feel it in the ground that holds me up. catches me when I fall. In my bag there was a head of greens, salmon from an island buttressed by an old sea. The sea said nothing, nor could I.
It's so lovely.
It is a very, very, really stirring poem. Pui, I think everyone who has heard the show is going to be really interested to know both where they could find Fanling in October and also your other books, which have been out in the last few years, if they were interested in reading more of your work.
Oh, sure. For Fanling in October will be published by Barrow Street Press. So if listener would go to Barrow Street Press website, they should be able to either purchase a copy or find information about it. However, the book is not out yet, not until October. So just stay tuned. My other books are all available at Amazon at this time.
I want to thank Pui Ying Wong for her beautiful, striking poetry and for Lee Slonimsky doing a lovely interview. I'm so happy both of you are on. Thank you so much. And thank you all for listening.